attending another press conference at this office. Over the past few days, the most topical issue has been the insertion of the government of Guyana of a provision in the cybercrime bill which could mean or could have grave implications for freedom of speech in Guyana. In fact, looking at the provision or that specific provision of the bill that was inserted in the Select Committee is reminiscent of the old National Security Act that obtained in the period of undemocratic rule under the PNC. That act was repealed in the early 90s, and that act was specifically designed to stifle dissent and to take action against individuals who may disagree with the government of Guyana. It was a repressive tool in the hands of a repressive government. In Guyana, we have seen a trend towards unilateralism. We've seen a trend where the government acts with impunity regardless of laws or provisions of our Constitution or indirect contravention of provisions of our Constitution. And so I see this insertion, this new bill in the cybercrime bill as another tool available to a government that is becoming increasingly undemocratic in its march towards a dictatorship. This is why the entire Guyana must fight to ensure that this retrograde step to charge people for sedition, an archaic offense because of what they say, which could cause disaffection with the government. But more, if you look through quite a few of the elements of that provision, you would see that they're not so much concerned about people in Guyana and protecting their rights, because the entire cybercrime bill was for a purpose, not to protect the government of Guyana, but to protect our children against child pornography. It was to protect people against assault on their privacy, electronic assault on their privacy. It was to protect the people of the country in their business so that their data or their computers would not be compromised, that cyberspace had in Guyana, without over-regulating it, without affecting content of speech, that it would have some rules so that people can't act illegally in harming others. That was the purpose of this bill. They have converted, by inserting this provision, they have converted what a purpose that almost all Guyanese would agree to, that is protecting all of us and our children, into protection for government and the ministers. So one provision says, under 18(1), a person could be charged for sedition if he or she encourages, incites, induces, aids, abets, counsels any person to commit or to conspire with another person to commit any criminal offense against the President, Prime Minister, or any minister of the government established by law in Guyana. We already have laws protecting all of our citizens, and I would assume that the Prime Minister and the President and ministers are citizens of Guyana, and that they too are afforded the same sort of protections that we all enjoy under law against criminal acts. Why do they need a special provision in this article to protect the interests of only those categories of people? Secondly, in the same one where it says, goes on, in the same 18(1)(3), where death of the President, Prime Minister, or any minister of the government or any other person occurs as a result of the commission of an offense under subsection 1, the person who commits the offense is liable on conviction, on indictment, to imprisonment for life. So I would assume that if any death occurs in Guyana, that you are liable to imprisonment for life, or well, in this case, it's defined life. So very little limitations or discretion for the judges. They don't need these special provisions. I suspect because Granger had a couple of threats that was inserted here. Now, this provision has no place in a democratic Guyana, in a free Guyana. In a Guyana where free speech is an important part of our democracy, where freedom of expression is defined and protected by our Constitution. This bill has no place in this history. Now, I've noticed in today's newspaper a very worrying set of statements. In the Starbuck News, it says that Nandalal, who was a member of the Special Select Committee appointed in August 2016 to review the bill, stated on his Facebook page that the sittings of the committee conflicted with his rigorous court schedule. As a result, I was unable to attend most, if not all, the sittings of this committee. Therefore, I did not support the provisions of this bill in that committee as is being alleged, he stressed. He further said he holds strong objections to certain clauses in that bill and identified clauses 17 and 18 when contacted by Starbuck News. With his party, the PPPC, having supported these provisions at the committee stage, it is left to be seen how he responds to the bill when it comes up for debate. So, let me make a few clear statements here. That Facebook posts by members of parliament and leaders of the PPP are not the official position of the People's Progressive Party. We have asked our members of parliament, we have very little restrictions on their posts, accepting that these posts be decent, in keeping with what we believe in, and robust in the defense of people and the party's policies. So we defined a framework. We don't censor the Facebook posts of individuals, nor do we endorse them on every occasion. But Facebook posts by any individual is not the official party position. I speak as General Secretary for the People's Progressive Party. So that's the first point. The second point is that this article created the impression that MP Nandalal has reservations about the bill, but the People's Progressive Party in the committee supported this bill and its provision. That is not true. Absolutely not true. The People's Progressive Party, and I speak for the PPP, does not support this inclusion, this undemocratic inclusion in the cybercrime bill. In fact, we're opposed to it. The fact that several members of several members of parliament on our side were members of the committee, the select committee that met on several occasions to consider this bill, and were there and absented themselves, or were absent sometimes. Their presence alone, just being named to that committee, does not elevate this to support of the PPP. Let me tell you exactly what happened. On Monday last, before the bill was, we were supposed to debate this bill on Thursday, I held a meeting with our members of parliament. We discussed our parliamentary agenda. We discussed our positions on various bills and reports in the parliament. We identified the speakers who will speak on those issues before parliament. When the issue of the cybercrime bill came up, the members of parliament who were there, including many of the members on the committee, did not express support for the bill. In fact, I said, after listening to some of the members of parliament, I asked two sets of MPs, the first led by Anil Nandalal, to examine the bill and compare it with similar bills or bills of a similar nature from around not just the Commonwealth jurisdiction, but in the developed countries, particularly Europe and North America, because my fear was that we may be infringing on privacy issues and going too far in trying to regulate the internet or cybercrime. We needed to strike a balance between protecting our people, protecting our children, protecting data, and liberties of people, their civil rights, which I see freedom of speech and expression as a civil right. So I asked on Monday last for that to be examined. I asked another set of MPs to make contact with the telephone companies and those who are the ISPs in Guyana, the internet service providers, to find out if they had been consulted about the provisions of the bill. And then I said we will meet later in the week to determine our position. The moment we discovered this clause from that meeting, we said we are opposed to this bill. So the PPP did not approve the bill. The PPP does not support this bill. This is not the party's position. Now, you can blame us and you can blame some of our MPs for not attending the meeting with due diligence. You can blame them for that, and it will be justified because we should have been there at the committee level, maybe to fight against this inclusion, because the inclusion took place when they were not there. So they couldn't approve it. So there's no way that members of the People's Progressive Party sat in that meeting, as is implied in this article and some other articles that I've seen, and agreed to the insertion of this undemocratic clause. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You can blame them for not attending the meeting with diligence. But this government surreptitiously, in their absence, inserted this undemocratic clause. And the moment we discovered it, as we did, we said we are opposed to it. We are opposed to it. And that, so I wanted to make that very, very clear. I've seen all sorts of statements from this government about it. Harman says cybercrime bill will protect the state from espionage. You know, I keep wondering what kind of state secrets we have. You know, how many nuclear bunkers we have in the Pomeroon. And, you know, the chemical factories, gas factories that we're building, that we have to be so worried about state espionage, you know, and sabotage and subversion. Look at Dick. He is not saying anything about people's rights, about children and protecting them, and protecting people from transmittal of images without their consent. I remember we had that one time when I was president. We had a long debate. Since then, we started talking about how do we protect people against this. People will videotape girls and then go after them for sex with the threat of really making public the videotape if they did not. Gangs of people, like young men. And we were debating how do we protect people against that sort of thing: blackmail, coercion, privacy. That was what this bill was all about. Not to take away people's rights or to make offenses seditious. And look at the direction: espionage, sabotage, and subversion. They could have easily reenacted the National Security Act that they had under the PNC in the past, because that is what this provision amounts to. So there's no way that the PPP agreed to this, and so Nandalal will not have a conflict, as this newspaper pointed out, because the PPP approved the bill and he was the sole person who disagreed with it. That's not the case. Not the case. And I want to reiterate, Facebook posts are great, but they're not the position of the party. Now, I've seen, I just came back from Letem, and I've seen a flurry of activities by ministers in the hinterland. So, large numbers of aircrafts being chartered, 20, 30 staff going in to have conferences, etc. So I gather we had a conference in Region 9 on health care and with health workers. But I spoke with nearly 700-800 people, because we had delegates alone who were like in over 500 delegates at the PPP's regional conference. And there are many others who came from the villages. And almost in every single village in the Rupunoni, they have problems with drugs and medical supplies. They have problems with the availability. So these ministers just fly to Letem, hold a conference, spend large sums of money, taking international organizations to hear how much they're training people. And then you don't have anything in these areas. In fact, some of them told me one minister who's a vice president said to them, they have to go back to bush medicine. That's the natural thing to do. up in the river, in Rewa and Apatari, when he visited that area. So Trotman went to talk about manganese in Madia. I guess because local, not Madia, Matthews Ridge. Local government elections have been called or set. It's November, from what I gather, Vulcan said in November. So suddenly we will see large numbers of flights into those areas like the Matakai sub-district and Mabaruma areas, where the last elections they spent on Letem, Mabaruma, and the Matakai area, flights into the interior alone in excess of $30 million to campaign for local government elections. So we've seen it start, but Trotman, the manganese plant is nothing new, as I pointed out several times before. It was dormant, and the agreement that they're implementing now was signed by me even before I left office. Now, we had a team that visited Alistair Charlie, the Pauline Sokai, Nigel Dharamlal visited Region 7, Upper Mazaruni. And the biggest complaint of the people there, which I pointed out at the press conference some time back when they returned, was that this government took their weapons in the amnesty period and never returned it to them. And with a promise that they will give them back almost immediately. Now, having made this a public issue, we now see they're moving on the issue that they're going to return the weapons once the PPP spoke about it. And our teams went in to visit the areas, and they know that people raise this issue with our teams because they have people work in special branch who follows our teams. But look what we have to do. The people couldn't get their firearm because 2 vice presidents and a minister couldn't fly in to give it to them. Their flight got delayed. Now we need 2 vice presidents of Guyana and a minister to fly into Region 7 to return people's weapons to them that they took from them. This should be a function of the police. But they're going to fly back there like, I know, it's their benevolence now. This big, benevolent, caring government giving the people a good life by returning their weapons to them and costing us millions of dollars in flights to the interior. That is what we have. On the land issue, I've heard tons of complaints about what Granger told the people when he was campaigning before he became president. How quickly they will get their extensions and their titles, etc. They have not titled a single community in 3 years. In 3 years, they have not titled a single community. They gave out 1 title that was practically processed under the PPP. So it was only there to be handed over. But 3 years have passed, and what did they get? That the people are avaricious. They got too much land already. Remember Keith Scott's infamous speech. And so when Sidney Alicock goes to Anai and tell people, prepare to be movers and shakers in the oil and gas economy, your colleague in Parliament said to the Amerindians of this country, if you get more land, you can benefit from oil and gas revenue, in a speech he made in 2016. And until today, there's been no repudiation of that speech, and Alicock has not said a word about it. And it was made in the National Assembly. So it is duplicitous. You go to talk about the Amerindian rights, and now FPIC is being violated routinely. You go to Napi village, they practically were imposing an IDB project on the community. Now, we were working for a long time in trying to get the research stations in the interior. So finally, they got the loan from the IDB, and they should do a research station, which is good. But they're trying to impose it on Napi. And the people there have argued that you're going to put this floodlands that we have claimed in the as extension to our community. Are you going to sign the MOU or not that the community has proposed? They're making no commitment to sign the MOU in Napi. And so, imposition of a project. And this brings me to the free, prior, informed consent that a lot of their colleagues, some NGOs, as well as the international community, and people like Sidney Allicock used to hold as gospel, free, prior, informed consent. What happens to it today? They walk into the communities, no free, prior, informed consent of these communities. In fact, that was the biggest complaint that I've heard from the Amerindian leaders. And then the Constitutional Indigenous Peoples Commission. They're coming to Parliament to renew the commission, and the commission had 5 members from the NTC, 3 from the NTC, and 2 coming from the NGOs. So one would assume a minimum of 5 persons who are of Amerindian origin who will represent the Amerindian interests on the Indigenous Peoples Commission. What they're trying to do is to dilute the Amerindian participation on the Indigenous Peoples Commission by increasing the numbers of state agencies and others in the composition of the IPC. And so now it's gone to 15. So there will be 5 of 15 rather than 5 of 12, guarantee 5 of 12. So these things are taking place right before our eyes, and they talk about indigenous peoples. And this, it was sad to listen, because I sat and listened to the leaders of the communities in Region 9, how their lives are deteriorating under this government. And then we still hear about, the good life they're giving to people. And this comes about at a time when they argue that they don't have money for lots of things. So most of you would have seen in Parliament, the last supplementary will give you an idea, running into billions of dollars. So now this government is going to buy 4 new aircrafts for the army, not fighter jets to fight Venezuela, not attack helicopters, but 4 new aircrafts, and I would say half of those, or maybe all of them, will be used to transport security for the president when he goes into the interior. Because when he goes into the interior now, it's a production by itself. You think we're going to war with a number of security people that you take into the interior with him. I traveled as president into the interior with 2 persons, 1 or 2 persons. Now it's a big production, advanced party of 20, 30, etc. So those aircrafts will cost us about $700 million. 700 million. These are the people who don't have money to pay the severance to the sugar workers that they're supposed to pay by law. But they have money now to buy 4 new aircrafts for the army that will cost close to $700 million. Check the supplementary that they came for. Wasn't in the budget? They're asking for 484. They spent about 200 million already. They're going to build a fence at NOC for $81 million. That's the priority now. They now realize that they have to spend $600 million to give to BNI, and this will be a recurrent expenditure every year, and it will grow because Gaisuco used to maintain the drainage canals. So now that the Gaisuco, like Enmore and the other estates are not functioning, somebody still needs to maintain the canals. So this subsidy that was going to Gaisuco, now they still have to give it to DNI because the canals need to be maintained. So that's coming up. And then there's nearly 800 million for the ICJ case, that is to defend our sovereignty. Now this is coming as supplementary. So one is wondering, are they going to pay this money over and then take it from the consolidated fund? Because this 800 million is a supplementary. Now I gather you go for supplementary only when you have exhausted what you have. So I assume, since the minister invested this abroad, it is, and I pointed out the fallacy of that at the last press conference about this investment, that this will be new money now coming from the Treasury. Or alternatively, if they're paying, this is about $4 million US, paying $4 million into the consolidated fund and then approving $4 million through the parliament. If they can pay $4 million, they can pay all of this through the consolidated fund. And this just supports the point I made in the budget debate last year, and that I've been saying all along. There was no real reason to keep this money outside of the consolidated fund, because just as how they came to the parliament for supplementary here for $400 million, they could have come for supplementary for $4 billion, 20 million US, the same amount, or 18 million US, and they would have gotten it. So there was no compelling reason to keep the money outside of the budget, except for one reason, that is to use it in a manner that we all know now and we suspect. Now, the president, I've seen a lot in the economy, and every day, almost serialized, I see something the central bank is doing, about 10 times, talking about new payment systems, the new set of laws that they're putting in Parliament. But when you look at those, the fine print of a lot of those laws, it is to give the central bank greater powers that could harm some of the interests of the commercial banks. And so even the deposit insurance scheme that the government wants to put in place, it is now going to assess the banks on a biannual basis, a sum based on, I think, their reserve holding, that they will have to pay into that account, that fund. The government will just put in seed money. And so now the commercial banks would have a new cost, which could push up interest rates to people like us, because they'll have to pay for an insurance scheme. And so they'll have more unremunerated deposits. So on the deposits that are remunerated, they'll have to push up interest rates. We have to be cautious. I don't want to deal with that today, but we're going to talk extensively about the 4 pieces of legislation that were tabled in Parliament at their last sitting, the first reading, because they are very worrying. And in fact, I think the government is making some provisions for bank failures, because we have seen a growing portfolio of bad debts. That has been factually demonstrated, like by graphs. You have seen how bad debts in the bank's loan portfolio has practically doubled, and it has been like we've seen by graph now how the reserves have practically dropped, seriously dropped, how they sold out the gold reserves, etc. So watch out for those pieces of debt. We've seen the GRA too talk up revenue collection. So the GRA says 8 billion above 2017 and 5.6 billion above target. That's for the first quarter. And wonderful, but it is in a declining economy. When you take more taxes from people in a declining economy, you shrink aggregate demand. And this is counterproductive. It's pro-cyclical, it's not anti-cyclical. It will cause us to greater harm. It's less money for investments. And it's not money produced now. It's not money generated now from profits now. It's going back to the past. So the GRA says a lot of this is from the amnesty. Amnesty for past tax liabilities. Now, you know what I said at budget time, that this allows itself for a lot of corruption. When GRA could negotiate, any person could walk off the street and they can negotiate with you your tax liabilities under the cover of an amnesty, an overall amnesty. It leaves room for discretion on the part of every single transaction. This is why we were opposed to it at the City Council too, and our fear was justified. When they did the amnesty, was a totally corrupt act. In an amnesty, they have to come clean about either name how much they outline to the country, what level of debt they eliminated, debt to the GRA they eliminated, and by taxpayers. But they may argue you can't share taxpayers' information in the public domain, so at least we will know there's a policy driven it, that if you owe 2 million, you'll get 10% written off. If you own 4 million, you get 20% written off. And then we can audit GRA against those measures. Now, if it's left to the discretion, there is no standard to audit against. So the auditors would go in and say, well, we can't do anything about this because the commissioner or the others had the right to do this. I'm very worried about that. And then naming sections of the community too, said the gold miners owe a lot. So they're going to be a new set of harassment, new tax. From what I gather now, they've gone to several people who've been paying their taxes, doing audits after audits, harassing them. In fact, some of the contractors came to see me, and they said that the Ministry of Finance is now asking them to pay VAT on government projects that they did the last time, in 2017, that they didn't charge the government VAT on. So they didn't charge it, they didn't collect it. So now, but the GRA and the Ministry of Finance now still sees this as a tax liability. If they did it from 2018, it's fine. But if the people didn't collect it from the state was their client. They did work for the state. Now GRA is saying the government should have paid them the 14% VAT to pay into the treasury, and they didn't collect it from the government, therefore they are liable to it. What will that do to these contractors? Just bankrupt them. And that is what is happening now. So we have to be very careful about this. And the president continues on his walk in the sky in La La Land, Wonderland. He went to Linden and said, make the tongue an example of commerce, gateway to the rest of Guyana. Get out of the mindset of mining and producing raw materials only. What are your policies to make that happen? The people in Linden suffering. Let me tell him what we did to get that diversification. I don't want to go for too long, but when we had the industry was in crisis and we managed to get Linden privatized and secure some of the jobs, about 600 jobs. We then had this area study that I led as Minister of Finance, several measures rolled into West Watuka to open up agricultural lands to diversify the local economy, a business incubation center to start up new business outside of the bauxite industry, a small loan scheme that would allow people who had business ideas to access small loans to start up their venture. We built a call center that had employed 80 persons to get into the IT field, 88 persons, that was closed 3 weeks after they got into office. 88 some persons lost their job. And then he goes there. That was a real practical way of solving problems. We put in the different infrastructure. I don't want to go on forever. But we had a real thought out approach how to do that. Here he goes with a declarative set of statements again. And then if you listen to Amna Ali, she's even worse. She talks about as PNC General Secretary. I don't know. They need to carry her on the ground. Not dress up and go to Parliament all the time. She says people are enjoying the wonderful life under us. And then goes on about the PPP. It's amusing. Have you seen? You should read, if you want a piece of comedy, read Amna Ali's statement. Adios PPPC. Adios, bring it on APNU AFC. People at all levels are enjoying the good life promised by David Granger. This is like a script for a comic stand-up comedy that we have from them. It doesn't know. If Granger had just left the conference center where he went, not the conference center, the exhibition in Linden, and walked down the road to the market and talked to 10 people, then he will get a real feel about what's happening in the country and in Linden and how people are suffering. The road from Linden to Kwapwani, 4.5 hours, huge potholes. You should have just taken a drive up. But of course, truckmen flew in to meet their bauxite workers. Wouldn't drive on the road. That is what we have there. I saw something by Harman. Harman can't establish, today he said that he can't establish the link with the fuel. Harman knows, everyone in this government knows, every single cabinet member who are the people who are smuggling fuel in Guyana and how they are linked to people in this administration, to ministers and other high-level officials. They all know that. Every one of them. Now, Harman doesn't know. All he has to do is to ask for the records. He knows everything under the sun. He could remember the Tulsi Prasad matter from 1988, but he doesn't know what's happening now. That was a deep, dark hole that we left. Well, the deep, dark hole with the Tulsi Prasad land was they sold a large tract of land, 100 odd acres, for $1.8 million. The gentleman paid a small sum and then refused to pay the rest, that whole Lilendal area. He then went to the CCJ, to the court, to claim prescriptive rights, that he was squatting on the land and so he should get it for free. Didn't even want to pay the $1.8 million for that whole tract. Massive. So it went all the way to the CCJ, and the CCJ ruled in the government's favor. Harman should be giving us a national award for getting back a large tract of land that they sold to Tulsi Prasad at below market price that he didn't even want to pay. And of that, we didn't have to buy back the land. We put the aquatic center there on the land. 30 acres was set aside for the specialty hospital. That would have been Tulsi Prasad property. And then 10 acres was sold to Movie Town at above market value for nearly $200 million. Only 10 acres were sold at over $200 million. As a result of which today, because of PPP's action, this government still has a tract of land to build a specialty hospital. We got the aquaculture center, and we sold a piece for $200 million when all of it would have been gone to an individual for $1.8 million Ghana dollars. He should be thanking us. That's a deep, dark hole. And guess what happened? Now, after failing at the CCJ on prescriptive rights, Mr. Passad then went and claimed specific performance under the contract that he himself ignored. And he got a judgment now. And the Attorney General, 3 years in office, he didn't know that the man filed a case again. And my feeling is once this goes to the CCJ will throw it out, because they've already ruled on that same piece of land and given it to the government of Guyana, returned it. You can't fail on one basis and then go back on another. And so this Harman says it's a PPP big black hole. And he can't remember, he doesn't know anything. He could go far back to the 80s, but can't remember, doesn't know who is smuggling fuel, just a stone, not throw even. What is a shorter verb to describe something less than a throw? You know, maybe a sneeze, you could hear it within distance about the corruption that's taking place in the fuel smuggling thing. So this is unbelievable. And then I saw $20 million they're getting for the Sovereign Wealth Fund to come and tell this government again about principles. 20 million in grant, another set of foreign consultants. Tomorrow, if they give me a lawyer and one technical person, I could deliver a draft of this Sovereign Wealth Fund within a week. 1 week. And with provisions that are specific to Guyana. Not having to talk about it all around the world. Because consultants would come and tell you again about the best practices. It still doesn't absolve the government from taking a position. What's your position? I know what the consultants' positions are. What is yours? Because we've seen when consultants tell you things before, like Mangle, auction the blocks, and you refuse to accept it. So it comes down back to, you can bring in $100 million worth of consultants as the fig leaf. It comes back to the government. And now it has been shifted to 2020. It should have been in place by 2060. It's been shifted. So again, I notice the government has set up a task force for bauxite after I urge that they pay attention to what's going on in the Berbice River with the Rusal matter, and that it would have implications for people in the river, in Kokwani and the surrounding communities. But I had pointed out too that because of the position they took on sugar, they would have boxed themselves into a corner. We don't have that same conflict, because I can demonstrate what we did for the bauxite industry in Linden, as well as in Araima, in Burmine, in Everton area, all of those places. I can demonstrate several measures that we took in place to secure jobs and to bring help to people, like taking over community services. The PP has no conflict now. That's why we can call on them to extend the same benefits to sugar workers, because it would have been duplicitous of us if we hadn't done that, and now to call for help to the sugar workers. But on the other hand, having said that they don't have money to put in the sugar industry, they don't even have money to pay the severance. Now, how can they help there? A private company might be losing jobs, and the state company lost 7,000 jobs, and you don't have money there. So we're watching to see how they will address this matter, because they've boxed themselves into a corner. What will be the new excuses of this Granger administration? Is it just gaffe that they went down there to talk to the workers? And then I must comment on the null pressing of the charges that we've laid against some of these ministers. Now, I think it's a travesty. This director of public prosecution, when a private criminal charge was levied against me, was instituted against me, she was written to, and the lawyers pointed out the flaws in the charge. She never responded, never null prossed it, never argued it should have gone to the police before. And so we had to go through the court system, and people were, and then finally I was vindicated. And if you look at the charge itself, how flawed it was, that was a prime case for null prossing. These charges that have been instituted against several ministers are serious charges. They deal with large sums of money being squandered or corruptly given out with the direct involvement and knowledge of ministers. These are serious charges. I would have thought that everyone in Guyana, including the DPP, in the cause of good governance, would have wanted these charges, the people who were so charged, to go to court and see whether the courts will vindicate them or convict them. That the court would vindicate or convict them. In fact, now, but on the other hand, she argued that the charges didn't go to the police and that in the cause of good governance, she is withdrawing these charges. What good governance? What good governance? And is that her remit? But even if it is good governance, how could spending over $1 billion of taxpayers' money, breaking all the rules, be a cause in support of good governance at the Durban Park? How could a breach of the tender board, the procurement regulation, which resulted in the award of a contract of $600 million through sole, be in support of good governance? How could a bond where there was no tender, absolutely no tender, form that was contracted by this government for a price so blatantly above the market value that people are still in shock that it persists until this day, in spite of the promises that the contract will be terminated, be in the cause of good governance? I think it's just a lame set of excuses. Lame, totally lame. And it's unbelievable that in this country they must go, we must now, every time a citizen of this country wants to take action against a minister for real serious breaches, now has to go to the police that are controlled by the ministers too. Because the police force now, SOCU, is directly under the control of the ministers. Take directions from them, SOCU. And that brings me to Sarah. Sarah, now, they always, every time they're caught, they trot out a Sitlinton to give a couple of comments. They trot out Clive Thomas to say, oh, hold on a minute, more is coming, more serious ones coming. So Clive Thomas now is saying, I think I have it somewhere here, that I may have left it. Anyhow, he is saying we have some serious cases. Oh, here it is. This is what Clive Thomas had to say about corruption. it was in DPI statement, and it says SARA identifies 10 cases to begin recovering state assets. Well, over 50 to 60 cases for this recovery of state assets that the SARA is reviewing. Beginning at the third quarter, start of the third quarter, we are hoping to focus on about 10. We are hoping to focus on about 10 because part of the international commitment we have depends on the value of the cases, and we have to meet a certain target value. They have to be above a certain figure for the cases to proceed overseas, to make it worthwhile for the agencies to proceed with the cases. So we have to get cases that will at least be asking the courts overseas to deal with at least 10 million US dollars. Now, he's saying we're hoping to start to go after cases in September, hoping to. Now, and these cases have to be over 10 million US dollars. So that's serious corruption. Now, why wait until September? Why wait? They've not been shy. Clive Thomas has never been shy of accusing PPP of corruption all along, how much we stole, what he's going to come after, etc. Why not tell this country today who are the 10 cases? Because I would assume you already know. And if you tell them now they can't move their money or their assets, you can tell the country today, here are the 10 persons or the individuals that we have, and we have already sought the assistance of the government of the United States or Switzerland or wherever, or the Dominican Republic, to freeze their assets so they can't move it now. That would be a wonderful thing to do. Then it will be in the public domain, and those individuals would not be able to move their assets. Why wait until September to do this? It is another set of excuses. And then he said something about December, etc. He's going to do others. So below 10 million now, that's still a lot of money. I've been calling on this government to hire a firm, since the big firms, FraudNet and the others, wouldn't deal with cases below 10 million US dollars abroad. You want somebody who will deal with less than 10 million. It could be a million US, that's still a lot of money. So why not hire an international firm and say to Guyana, we have just hired this firm to trace the assets of all former MPs, former presidents, current MPs, because, and ministers, because I think he will get a shock. In fact, he may know about this already. So I am calling on Granger, President Granger, once again to hire an international firm of his choice that has, reputation to trace the assets of all former MPs, former members of the cabinet, former presidents, and current ones. And then present a report of that nature to the country to do that. And the 10 million that you have, people who are over 10 million, don't wait until September. Just as how you've been liberal about talking about these people corrupt, Jagdeo corrupt, this one corrupt. Get it? Why not release it now? This wouldn't be any different. Release it now. It's a bunch of excuses all along. A bunch of excuses so once again they can feed red meat to the base. This is why I believe they came up with these baseless charges against Ashney Singh and Brassington. Because in the media for a long time, before the elections, people were calling to jail them. So they have people saying, what you told us was a lie. You've been 3 years, you can't get the evidence. So they have to do, even if it's spurious charges, even if it's frivolous, minor charges that will be dismissed, they would say, you see, we fulfill our commitment, we charge them. So this is all PR. If SARA really had any integrity, they will look at the fuel smuggling racket. Imagine they're coming after, that's what I saw Gail Tisher complain about. They said they want complaints. And so Gail Tisher said that Jagdeo gave the Burnham family 5 acres of land, freehold title, and they didn't have to pay a cent. So shouldn't you recover that too? Because that's a bad act of Jagdeo. It's a terrible thing how you would give the Burnham family this 5 acres of land and they paid 0. On the other hand, and this is in Georgetown, just here. On the other hand, we paid 5 million an acre for Plaisance, but that's corrupt. But this one, how come this act of Jagdeo is not corrupt? So we're hoping that they'll go to recover the 5 acres too of land that was given to the Burnham family. And there are many others I see she's written. So we start complaining. Let's see if he's going to go after the fuel smuggling too. So we've had this week a ton of this. And then maybe I should end this, local government elections. And you see this article here today in Starbuck News. It's a well-written article. It's a great article. And it shows the confusion in the AFC. Absolute confusion in the AFC. Absolute. They're treated. Trotman has gone back to the PNC. The whole executive there, if they don't realize that, then they're jokers. Because Trotman promised them to write Granger to take up their issues. Not interested in that. Trotman bread is well buttered. And so he's not going to take up any issues. Not only the Cummingsburg Accord has been seriously violated, they're a junior partner. And the local government issues now is the same thing. But I want to say to Guyanese that you will see them a little bit out now because local government elections are coming up. If it wasn't for local government elections, you wouldn't see them at all. They wouldn't come out at all. So these are just some of the issues I wanted to bring to your attention.
Question?
Yeah, sure.
My question pertains to the cybercrime bill.
Sure.
The sedition section in particular. Could you say when exactly did the PPP committee members notice that this section was a part of the bill? And is their absence a good enough excuse? I mean, even if you're absent, why not inquire?
Yeah, sure.
Why not inquire what you have missed?
I'm not saying it's a good excuse. I think we dropped the ball on this matter. We dropped the ball on this matter, and because it was only after the Monday meeting that we had in preparation for Parliament that I chaired, that when we had a good look at the bill, that we recognized that this provision had been inserted in our absence.
So this was on Monday?
This was Monday.
But nothing was said between Monday and
Because
Thursday?
they had to go back. There are about 3 versions of this bill. There is a 2015 version, a 2016 version. We wanted to get the minutes of the committee meeting, all of that before. And then we were still, I had asked at the beginning of the press conference, I told you, I had asked to look at experience from around the world. So that would help us to prepare our position in Parliament to fight it. But once we saw this provision, then a lot of things changed. So when I reconvened after that, we recognized we could not support it. But then they withdrew the bill.
So what happens now?
Because we are hoping that this withdrawal of the bill would mean that they themselves have recognized that the that the provision has no place in modern day Guyana. But let me give you an idea. Also, we could have argued for this in the committee. We can argue in the parliament in favor of removing this provision. We may make the best arguments in the world. We may have history and also the people of this country behind us. With the level of impunity in this government, and with the way they ring-fence themselves, and with their siege mentality, they have a one-seat majority, and they will use it as they have done on so many other occasions. We may not succeed. We may not succeed. So I just want that bit of realism to get home, you know, that people understand that we have done that many times, argued against things that we think would harm the interests of our country, both in committee and in the assembly. And they paid no heed to our arguments.
John Wright, Evening News. For clarity, are you calling for SARA to officially investigate the lies that have been reported in sections of the media between officials and the Jubilee vote that was intercepted by GEA? Second question, in 2016, 200 million had been allocated for the ICJ case. As a parliamentary opposition, in light of what has been sought in the supplementary paper, do you have any questions about that, sir?
I don't, it would be audited once it's part of the estimates, etc. I don't want us, there must be, the country must understand that if this government needs $50 billion to defend our borders, and they come to Parliament and can justify it, they would have our full support. Not 5 billion, not 18 million US, $50 billion, because what is at stake is our country, and there's no price tag to that. And so we were arguing that it could be done openly. We don't need to be ashamed of how we fight our case and how much money we spend. They hid the money and for other purposes. So once it comes and it gets budgeted and it gets spent, I suspect they would have bills and everything. And that's fine with me. I'm not going to nitpick over every cent if they have to pay a lawyer or anything like that in our sovereignty case. But I was pointing out that they could have easily deposited the $4 billion and then come back and seek a supplementary for it anytime they need the money without breaching the laws of Ghana, the financial laws, or the Constitution. And therefore the motive had to be different. And what's the other one?
The Jubilee vote.
Oh, yes, I would love Sarah to look at it. And why aren't some of these boats seized anymore? If you have illegal fuel, I gather for most cases the vessel would be seized. You had to pay triple the duty paid value, and you could be charged and go to court. This is the standard penalty available. So the point is that, did the commissioner get a call to say charge them only 36 million? This vessel was held before too. How come this vessel has preferential treatment? How come this vessel and similar vessels? Because there are a few of them now operating, and how come they have preferential treatment? But SARA will not do that, because SARA's sole purpose, it was created to harass the People's Progressive Party. Created for that purpose. All this, I saw Clive Thomas loves to name drop. UN helped and this one, the British and everybody, name dropping. There are provisions of that bill that are unconstitutional that's been challenged in court. I'm sure that the UN didn't tell them to insert those provisions. It's name dropping.
Mr.
Yeah.
Jagdeo, you spoke about the charges and the DPP's rejection of those filed by the PPP. Would the PPP be heeding her advice and take the matter to the police? And also May 7th is approaching, which is the date expected for Mr. Singh and Brassington to appear in court. Will they be, or does the PPP have another time?
Now, these are charges instituted against individuals. So the PPP doesn't have a position on whether they would appear or not. These are decisions that these individuals have to make in consultation with their lawyers. I can share my view, but at the end of the day, those individuals, in consultation with their lawyers, would have to make a decision what will be their best defense. So that's the first thing. The second issue is that I'm wondering whether it would even be useful to take these charges to the police. Whether it would be useful to take the charges to the police, because the way everything is politicized now, you're just not going to get an investigation. But we have to discuss this issue further, whether we go to the police or not with the charges. Yes, anything else?
I know at your previous press conference you announced that no charges will be filed. Do you think the decision by the DPP to dismiss the two sets would
that have us reconsidering? We have to reconsider the other charges we were preparing now, in light of the way the DPP has acted. Thank you. Yeah, go.
Final question. I don't know if you've noticed in the newspapers about the GDF ad that has sought male-only recruits.
Male-only recruits?
Yeah.
An ad in our newspapers in Guyana in this era?
Yes, seeking male-only recruits.
Well, I don't know what our women's organization are doing. They should. No, you can't have any policy like that. What are they effectively saying? That women don't have a place in the army, they can't do certain types of work, they can't fight at the border if necessary, they don't love, they're not patriotic. If that's the case, if that's true, I'm totally opposed to it. Totally opposed to it. It's a 14th century thinking, if that's the case.